Hi everyone. Have you ever been frustrated with painting watercolor leaves? Well, in today's video, I'm going to show you 8 super simple ways to get the perfect watercolor leaves every time. We're keeping things super simple today by only using sap green, but you can use so many different colors for leaves. And I wanted to use 2 different brush sizes so that you can see the difference in the leaf depending on the brush that you use. So this is a size 8 round brush, and the first leaf is made by tapping the tip of the brush, pushing down on the body, and then slowly releasing back up to the tip. So I will also be transitioning from the top-down view and this side view so you can get a better idea of how my brush looks from the side and how much pressure I'm putting down on the paper. For this stroke, how hard you push down on the body of the brush creates the shape of the leaf, and how long you drag your brush across the paper determines the length of the leaf. So you can make really short leaves and you can make really long leaves, and depending on how round your brush is, you can make your leaves really wide. So for this size 4 round brush, my leaves are not very wide because it's a smaller barrel with the brush bristles, and so we're getting some tinier, thinner leaves, but we can make them short or we can make them long. Leaf number 2 is doing 2 of those strokes for leaf number 1, but combining it into one leaf. So we are tapping down with the tip of our brush, pushing down for the circular part of the leaf, releasing towards the end, but we're doing it twice and leaving white space in the center to kind of represent the vein of the leaf. So again, we can do a shorter, rounder leaf, and we can do a thinner, longer leaf, connecting those tips at the end, but still leaving a slight bit of white space in the middle so that we can give the impression that there is more depth and movement within the leaf, which gives us so much interest when we're keeping our leaves really simple. We can add just a tiny bit of this white space and it creates so much detail without really having to do anything to our leaves. So this is a really great way to paint a leaf that is really basic but has something unique and interesting about it. And I know that we're keeping it really basic by not adding any different colors, just doing sap green, but sometimes I like to do one side lighter and one side a shade darker, which can represent a folding in the leaf so it looks like there's some shadow. Leaf number 3 is just using the tip of our brush to kind of squiggle around to create a jagged edge. There's so many different ways you can do this. You can point it downward, you can point it upward, but we're using the tip of our brush to kind of direct these points and the edge of the leaf so that we can get this really interesting rough shape, which is very common in lots of different leaves. And then for this one, again, we can leave the white space in the center and kind of help bring those ends together while still having a rough edge on the sides. And you can see from the side view, I am leading with my tip, but towards the bottom of the leaf, I'm using more of the body of my brush. And then as I come to the tip of the leaf, I'm using more of the tip of my brush. So you can kind of play around with the different pressures that you push down with the leaves, because the more pressure you put down, the more bristles of your brush you're using, which will give you bigger shapes, less control, more paint and water. And so depending on what you want, you can push down or release, and it will give you completely different feels to all of your leaves. And then this is the smaller brush, which I think creates an even daintier edge and has a little bit more control because the bristles are smaller. And with the smaller brush, I find it harder to use more of the bristles, so I really mostly keep to the tip. Okay, leaf number 4. Leaf number 4 is just a line leaf, a grassy type leaf, but there are 2 different ways that you can do it. You can pull away from you, which creates a completely different shape than if you pull towards you, especially with a round brush. These strokes away from you are going to have a more pointed tip on the end because the brush is going out, so it's kind of flicking out, creating a point. But then as you bring the stroke towards you, it starts rounder and then becomes more of a point as you drag it towards you. So the leaves on the edges are more rounded in the one where you're pulling towards you versus the one where you're pulling away. And it works the same for the small round brush. When I pull out, I get more of a pointed tip at the end, which reminds me more of like grasses or palm trees. And then when I pull in, it's a little bit more rounded, which could be a fern or grasses or leaves that are kind of together on a stem in this long pattern. Leaf number 5. This is actually the leaf I use the most, and it's just a random shaped leaf. I am kind of dabbing my brush with paint in a rough and kind of chaotic way, and you can see from the side I'm using my brush kind of at a side angle and doing this scrubbing motion because I want the jaggedness, I want the organic texture. And when I'm painting loose florals and I'm adding leaves around the flowers, this is typically what I do. But if you want more form, you can always create bunches of these leaves and attach them to stems. But sometimes I am just creating this shape around flowers without really attaching them too much to each other, just creating texture and interest within a bouquet. And even though this is the leaf I do the most and gravitate toward the most, you need both kinds of leaves. You need really textured leaves and you need really smooth leaves. That's what makes a bouquet balanced. My mom is a florist and she talked about that all the time growing up. You can't just have too much texture, it's going to overwhelm your eye. So you need the nice and smooth and long and delicate, elegant leaves, but you also need the chaos, the texture, the super interesting fuzzy flowers or leaves to complement each other. So I like to make sure I have some kind of rounder, softer leaf and also some of these more textured leaves and grasses when I am painting a bouquet. Leaf 6 is a circular leaf which looks like some eucalyptus. A lot of eucalyptus actually looks really long like some of the ones in leaf 1 and 2, but we are painting a circular leafed plant. The trick with circular leafed plants is they're not usually perfect circles when we're looking at them from a side view, so you actually need to paint them oblong or more oval shaped to the side and then just quickly connect the leaves through the center. So varying these different oval shapes is what's really going to give you that look like you're looking at all of these leaves kind of bunched together from the side. And we're using, you can see from this side angle, we're using our brush at an angle and kind of doing this little sweep forward motion to create not a circle, but an oval. And something that I love to do with these leaves that are kind of connected is play around with the color value. So some of these circular leaves can be really light and watery, and some of them can be super high in pigment, and then when they touch they'll bleed together and create so much interest when it dries, especially if you're using different hues of blue and green and they all blend together, and some are really watery, some are nice and pigmented. So there's so many different ways to create interest in some of these leaves that are connecting, not just in shape. We are keeping it really simple with the colors today, but color is a great way to add interest while everything is still wet. We can blend them together and we can add color by tapping it in. Okay, leaf number 7. It's not so much a leaf as it is a trick. You could do this with any leaf shape, and I mean literally create any leaf shape that has a solid center. Paint your leaf, and then you are going to flip your brush around, and with the pointed hard end of your brush, we are going to make indents in the paper to create veins in the leaf. Now, we're not completely scratching off the paper, we're just making a really firm indent into the paper for the center vein and then the side veins going out. And what this does is it creates an indentation in the paper where the paint can flow, and it creates darker lines in those areas that we don't have to go and paint. So I use this technique a lot when I want a dainty line here or there, because sometimes when we go in and paint a line, it can be thicker or not look very organic. But to me, these lines look very natural, and I think it's because the line is so thin with the pointed end of the brush, but also the paint is very similar. It's just flowing from the leaf down into those indentations. And so to me, it looks just really natural and basic and simple. So when I want to add some simple lines without having to go back and paint them later, this is the technique that I use. And I just wanted to show you this more interesting shape leaf that I kind of just threw together, because you really can do any leaf shape that you want and then just add this indentation for texture and interest, and it kind of creates the leaf shape, because you could just do a blob, but then you add this line in the center and it's all of a sudden a leaf. And then this, of course, also works with the smaller round brush. And you don't even have to use the other end of your brush to create the indentations. If you have a palette knife, or you have anything with a rounded, dull edge that can push into the paper without scratching it off, you can create this type of leaf very easily. You can do it in all different kinds of colors. I have a whole YouTube video where I did fall leaves, and I used this trick in, I think, every single leaf. It was super, super fun. So depending on the colors that you have in the leaf, that will depend on what colors flow into your indentation. Okay, and the last leaf is a curvy edged leaf. So there are a lot of times when you want to create more of a curve and less of a jagged edge, and you don't even want a straight edge. So you just need to use the side of your round brush to kind of bump out these shapes. And I am keeping some space in the center for the vein. So sometimes it's nice to kind of start with that and then use that as the meeting point to create those bumps from that point. And you can see from the side view, I'm using the full body of my brush to create a wave, and then I'm using the tip of my brush to make a nice sharp line so that we can have a nice clean white space center vein edge. I do the same thing, create that line for the other side, and then use the body of the brush to create the rounded edge on the other side. So I think this is a fantastic leaf to paint when you want the simple, clean elegance of the leaves from number 1 and 2, but you want maybe a little bit more interest without creating a ton of texture, because you need that simplicity, but you want maybe a little bit more interest to the edges. And those are our 8 simple leaves finished. I know that if you paint leaves like this, your leaves will come out perfect every time when you're painting in bouquets, and I hope you found this super helpful. I also snuck in some tidbits about composition and texture and thoughts about that, so if you want a more detailed video about that, please let me know down below, and I will see you all next time. Bye.